My name is Elena Rodriguez, and at 41 years old, I thought I knew my husband of 16 years better than anyone else in the world. 3 weeks ago, while reviewing our quarterly financial statements, I discovered that Marcus had liquidated our children's entire college fund. $340,000 accumulated over 15 years of careful saving, and invested it all in something called Mooncoin, a cryptocurrency that had since lost 97% of its value. When I confronted him about it, he looked me straight in the eye and said, "You'll thank me later, Elena. This is our ticket to generational wealth." What he didn't know was that I had already discovered something that would change everything about our marriage, our family, and our future. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning that shattered my world started like any other Tuesday in our suburban Phoenix home. I was in my home office, a converted spare bedroom overlooking our backyard pool, preparing for a client presentation. As a certified financial planner with my own practice, I prided myself on helping families secure their financial futures. The irony of what I was about to discover wasn't lost on me later. Marcus had already left for his job as a senior software engineer at a tech startup downtown. Our twins, Isabella and Diego, both 17 and high school seniors, were at their respective part-time jobs. Isabella worked at a local bookstore while Diego helped coach youth soccer on weekends. They were good kids, responsible and driven, already accepted to their dream colleges. Isabella was heading to Northwestern for journalism in the fall, while Diego had earned a partial scholarship to Arizona State for engineering. We had been so proud of their achievements, so excited about their bright futures. For 15 years, Marcus and I had religiously contributed to their 529 education savings plans, sometimes sacrificing our own wants to ensure our children would graduate debt-free. It was our biggest financial priority after our mortgage. I was reviewing our quarterly investment statements when I noticed something odd. The balance on Isabella's 529 plan showed $0. My heart skipped a beat as I quickly pulled up Diego's account. Also zero. Both accounts had been completely liquidated 3 months earlier. My hands trembled as I grabbed my phone to call Fidelity, thinking there must be some terrible mistake. After 20 minutes on hold and another 15 minutes of verification questions, the customer service representative confirmed my worst fear. "Mrs. Rodriguez, both accounts were liquidated on January 15th by the joint account holder, Marcus Rodriguez. The funds were transferred to your checking account and then immediately wire transferred to a cryptocurrency exchange called CryptoMax." The room seemed to spin around me. 3 months. He had hidden this from me for 3 months. During tax season, no less, when we typically reviewed all our financial documents together. How had I missed this? I hung up the phone and immediately logged into our bank accounts. There it was, clear as day. A deposit of $340,000 on January 15th, followed by an immediate withdrawal of the same amount to CryptoMax. I had been traveling that week for a financial planning conference in Denver. Marcus had handled our banking while I was away, something he often did when I traveled for work. My professional training kicked in, and I began documenting everything. Screenshots of the bank transfers, printouts of the zeroed 529 statements, notes about the timeline. As a financial planner, I knew how to investigate financial irregularities. I just never thought I'd be investigating my own husband. The next step was researching CryptoMax and this Mooncoin investment. What I found made my stomach churn. Mooncoin was what the cryptocurrency community called a shitcoin, a speculative digital currency with no real utility or backing. It had launched in December with massive marketing promises about revolutionizing online gaming. The initial price was $2.50 per coin. Marcus had bought in at the peak in January when Mooncoin hit $8.50 per coin. He had purchased approximately 40,000 coins. By April, when I discovered the investment, Mooncoin was trading at $0.23 per coin. Our children's college fund was worth roughly $9.200. I sat in my office chair, staring at the numbers on my computer screen, trying to process the magnitude of what Marcus had done. This wasn't just a bad investment. This was financial sabotage of our children's futures. This was a betrayal of every conversation we'd had about priorities, about family, about the kind of parents we wanted to be. But as I dug deeper into the CryptoMax account, Marcus had apparently used our joint email address for the registration. I found something even more disturbing. This wasn't his first cryptocurrency investment. There were dozens of transactions dating back 8 months. Smaller amounts at first. Money I hadn't noticed missing from our various accounts. Bitcoin, Ethereum, something called Dogecoin, and at least 15 other digital currencies I'd never heard of. The pattern was clear. Marcus had started small, maybe a few $100s here and there. But as some of his early investments showed modest gains, he'd become increasingly bold. By November, he was investing thousands at a time. The college fund liquidation in January was just the culmination of an 8-month gambling spree. The total amount was staggering. Beyond the $340,000 from the kids' college funds, Marcus had taken approximately $85,000 from our emergency savings, $23,000 from our vacation fund, and even $12,000 from our home improvement account we'd been building to replace our aging HVAC system. Nearly $500,000 gone. I needed air. I walked out to our backyard, where the Arizona sun was beginning its afternoon assault. Our pool sparkled in the light, surrounded by the desert landscaping we had so carefully planned and installed. This was supposed to be our forever home, the place where we'd watch our children grow up and maybe someday welcome grandchildren. Now I wondered if we'd be able to keep it. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Working late tonight. There's leftover casserole in the fridge. Love you. Love you." The words felt hollow now, meaningless. How do you love someone while systematically destroying their financial security? How do you look your children in the eye, knowing you've gambled away their futures? I needed to understand the full scope of the damage before confronting Marcus. As a financial planner, I knew that emotional decisions made in the heat of discovery often led to worse outcomes. I needed facts, documentation, and a clear plan for moving forward. I spent the rest of the afternoon creating a comprehensive spreadsheet of every cryptocurrency transaction Marcus had made. The CryptoMax account history was detailed, showing not just purchases but also some sales. I noticed that Marcus had cashed out a few smaller positions when they showed profits, but he'd immediately reinvested those gains into other cryptocurrencies. The most damning evidence was a series of transactions from February and March, after Mooncoin had already dropped to $3.00 per coin. Marcus had doubled down, transferring another $45,000 from our emergency fund to buy more. When that purchase lost value, he'd tripled down with the vacation fund money. This wasn't investing, this was gambling addiction. By the time Isabella and Diego arrived home from their jobs, I had composed myself enough to act normally. Isabella bounded into the kitchen with her usual energy, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, still wearing her bookstore name tag. "Mom, you'll never guess what happened today," she said, grabbing an apple from the counter. "This author came in for a signing, and she gave me advice about journalism school. She said Northwestern has one of the best student newspapers in the country." My heart broke a little more. Isabella had been so excited about Northwestern, had worked so.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Hard to get accepted. She'd written countless scholarship applications, maintained a 4.2 GPA while working part-time, and volunteered at a local animal shelter every weekend. The idea that her dreams might be derailed because of Marcus's recklessness was almost unbearable. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I managed, forcing a smile. "Are you all packed for the admitted students' weekend next month?" "Almost," she said, her face lighting up. "I can't wait to see the campus again and meet my potential roommate. Can you believe in 4 months I'll be living in Chicago?" I nodded, trying not to think about how we were going to afford her tuition without the college fund. Northwestern was expensive, nearly $60,000 per year. We had planned for the 529 fund to cover most of her costs, with maybe some small loans to bridge the gap. Diego arrived home shortly after, sweaty from soccer practice, his cleats slung over his shoulder. At 17, he was already 6 feet tall, and built like the athlete he was. He had Marcus's easy smile and my stubborn determination. "Hey, Mom," he said, kissing my cheek before heading to the refrigerator. "Coach thinks I might be able to walk onto ASU's club team if I keep improving. Can you imagine playing soccer in college?" Another knife to my heart. ASU was more affordable than Northwestern, especially with Diego's partial academic scholarship, but we'd still plan to use his 529 fund to cover room and board and other expenses. Without it, he'd need significant loans or might have to live at home and commute. That would be amazing, I said, watching my son's enthusiasm. You've worked so hard for this. After dinner, which I barely touched, I retreated to my office while the kids did homework. Marcus had texted again, saying he'd be very late, some urgent project deadline. I wondered if that was even true anymore. How many lies had he told me over the past 8 months? I decided to research Marcus's other investments to get a complete picture. Most of the cryptocurrencies he'd purchased had performed poorly. A few had gained modest value, but the overall portfolio was down approximately 78%. What had once been nearly $500,000 was now worth about $110,000. As I dug deeper into the CryptoMax platform, I discovered something else troubling. Marcus had enabled something called margin trading, which allowed him to borrow money against his cryptocurrency holdings to make larger bets. He currently owed CryptoMax $34,000 in margin debt, so the actual value of his cryptocurrency portfolio was only $76,000, and if the markets continued to decline, he could face a margin call that would require him to deposit more cash or have his positions automatically sold at a loss. I was documenting this information when I heard Marcus's car in the driveway. It was nearly midnight. I quickly closed my laptop and pretended to be organizing papers when he appeared in my office doorway. "Hey, beautiful," he said, looking tired but forcing a smile. "Working late again?" I studied his face, looking for signs of the deception I now knew he was capable of. Marcus was still handsome at 43, with graying temples that made him look distinguished rather than old. But there were new lines around his eyes, and he'd lost weight recently. I'd attributed it to stress at work, but now I wondered if it was the stress of hiding his financial crimes from his family. "Just catching up on some client files," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "How was your day?" "Busy," he said, loosening his tie. "But good. I think we're finally making progress on this new app. Could be a game changer for the company." Another lie, probably. Or maybe not. Maybe Marcus was still doing his job competently, while secretly destroying our family's financial future in his spare time. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. "That's great," I said. "I'm going to finish up here and then head to bed." He kissed the top of my head, the gesture once so comforting now feeling like another betrayal. "Don't stay up too late. You work too hard." Rich words from a man who had been secretly gambling away our children's futures. After Marcus went upstairs, I spent another hour researching cryptocurrency addiction and recovery resources. What I learned was both enlightening and terrifying. Cryptocurrency gambling had become a serious problem, especially among tech-savvy men in their 30s and 40s. The 24/7 nature of crypto markets, combined with the volatility and potential for massive gains, created a perfect storm for addictive behavior. The stories I read online were heartbreakingly familiar. Families destroyed by secret cryptocurrency investments. Retirement funds evaporated overnight. Children's college educations sacrificed on the altar of digital gold rushes. I wasn't alone, but that knowledge provided little comfort. I also researched legal remedies. In Arizona, both spouses have rights to community property, which meant Marcus couldn't legally liquidate the college funds without my consent. But practically speaking, the damage was already done. The money was gone, transformed into worthless digital tokens that might never recover their value. I could potentially file for divorce and seek damages, but that would further traumatize our children and might not recover the lost funds anyway. I could report the unauthorized transfers as fraud, but Marcus was a joint account holder, so it wasn't technically theft. The clock on my computer showed 1:47 a.m. when I finally closed my laptop and headed upstairs. Marcus was already asleep, or pretending to be. I lay in bed next to him, this man I'd loved for nearly 2 decades, and felt like I was sleeping next to a stranger. How had I missed the signs? As a financial planner, I was supposed to be good at identifying risky financial behavior. I helped my clients avoid exactly these kinds of mistakes. Yet my own husband had been conducting a secret financial life right under my nose. I thought back over the past 8 months, looking for clues I might have missed. Marcus had been more secretive with his phone lately, taking it with him to the bathroom, keeping it face down during dinner. He'd been staying at work later, claiming project deadlines and team meetings. He'd seemed more anxious, more distracted, but I'd attributed it to normal work stress. There had been one incident in February that now took on new significance. I'd found Marcus awake at 3 a.m., sitting at his computer in the living room. When I asked what he was doing, he'd said he couldn't sleep and was reading news. But the screen had gone dark before I could see what he was actually looking at. Now I realized he was probably checking cryptocurrency prices and making trades during the overnight hours when Asian markets were active. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake planning my next moves, trying to figure out how to confront Marcus and what options we had for recovery. By morning, I had decided on a strategy that would protect our family while forcing Marcus to face the consequences of his actions. I would give him one chance to come clean voluntarily. If he continued to lie and hide the extent of his gambling, I would have to take more drastic measures to protect our children's futures and our marriage. The next morning, Marcus was up early, showering and getting dressed for work as if nothing had happened. I made coffee and sat at our kitchen table, watching him move through his normal routine. He kissed my cheek goodbye, told me he loved me, and walked out the door to his car. I gave him 10 minutes to get down the street, then I called his office. "Hi, this is Elena Rodriguez," I said when the receptionist answered. "I need to speak with my husband, Marcus, please. It's a family emergency." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Rodriguez," she said, "but Marcus called in sick today. Didn't he tell you?" Another lie. Marcus wasn't at work. He was somewhere else, probably making more cryptocurrency trades or meeting with other gambling addicts he'd connected with online. I thanked the receptionist and hung up, my suspicions confirmed. Not only was Marcus gambling away our money, but he was also lying about his whereabouts and probably using work time to manage his cryptocurrency addiction. This changed everything. I could no longer afford to wait for the perfect moment to confront him. Marcus was spiraling, and every day of delay might mean more money lost to his gambling. I spent the morning calling our bank to put alerts on all our accounts, ensuring that I would be notified of any large transfers. I also changed the passwords on our investment accounts and added additional security measures. If Marcus wanted to gamble away more of our money, he'd have to get through me first. Then I made the hardest phone call of my life. I called my sister Carmen, who lived in San Diego and worked as a family therapist. "Elena?" she said, answering on the second ring. "This is a nice surprise. How are you?" "I need help," I said, and then I broke down completely, telling her everything about Marcus's secret gambling, the lost college funds, and the lies that had been accumulating for months. Carmen listened without judgment, asking clarifying questions and providing the emotional support I desperately needed. As a therapist, she understood addiction and family dynamics in ways that I didn't. "This isn't your fault," she said when I finished explaining everything. "Gambling addiction is a disease, and addicts become very skilled at hiding their behavior from the people they love. The question now is what you're going to do about it." "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm a financial planner. I help people make smart money decisions. How did I not see this coming?" "Because Marcus didn't want you to see it," Carmen said gently. "And because you trusted your husband, which is what you're supposed to do in a marriage. The betrayal here isn't just financial, it's emotional and psychological." She was right. The money was devastating, but the lies cut even deeper. Marcus had looked me in the eye every day for 8 months, while systematically destroying our family's financial security. He'd participated in conversations about the kids, college plans, knowing full well that he'd already gambled away their education funds. "What do I tell Isabella and Diego?" I asked. "Nothing yet," Carmen advised. "You need to confront Marcus first and understand the full scope of the problem. Then you can decide how to handle the conversation with the kids. They're 17. They're old enough to understand what's happening, but you want to present them with a plan for moving forward, not just a problem." After we hung up, I felt slightly better having shared the burden with someone I trusted, but I also felt the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. I was now the only financially responsible adult in our family. It was up to me to figure out how to salvage our children's futures and decide whether our marriage could survive this betrayal. I spent the rest of the day researching cryptocurrency recovery strategies and addiction treatment programs. What I learned wasn't encouraging. Most cryptocurrency investments that had lost 90% or more of their value never recovered. Some coins disappeared entirely when their creators abandoned the projects or were revealed as scams. Mooncoin, the particular cryptocurrency that Marcus had invested most heavily in, had all the hallmarks of a pump-and-dump scheme. The creators had hyped the coin's potential, attracted investors like Marcus, then slowly sold their own holdings while the price collapsed. The developers had stopped updating the project's website in March, and the last social media post from the Mooncoin team was over 6 weeks old. Our $340,000 was essentially gone forever. As for addiction treatment, there were some promising programs specifically designed for cryptocurrency and trading addiction, but they required the addict to acknowledge the problem and commit to recovery. I couldn't force Marcus into treatment, but I could create consequences that might motivate him to seek help. By the time Marcus came home that evening, I had a plan. "How was work?" I asked as he walked into the kitchen. "Challenging," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Lots of moving pieces on this project." "Interesting," I said calmly, "because when I called your office this morning, they said you'd called in sick." Marcus froze, his face going pale. For a moment, he looked like he might try to concoct another lie. Then his shoulders sagged, and I saw the first crack in his facade. "Elena, I can explain," he said quietly. "I'm sure you can," I replied. "But first, I think you should sit down. We have a lot to discuss about Mooncoin and the $340,000 you stole from our children." The look of shock and panic that crossed Marcus's face told me everything I needed to know. He thought his secret was safe. He thought he could continue gambling with our family's future indefinitely. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Marcus sank into one of our kitchen chairs, his hands shaking slightly. The confident, successful software engineer I'd married was gone, replaced by a man who looked defeated and scared. "How long have you known?" he asked quietly. "Since yesterday," I said, sitting across from him. "But that's not the important question. The important question is, how long have you been lying to me?" "Elena, please," he said, reaching across the table toward my hand. I pulled back, not ready for his touch. "I know how this looks, but I can explain everything. This isn't what you think." "Really?" I said, opening my laptop and pulling up the spreadsheet I'd created. "Because what I think is that you've been secretly gambling with our money for 8 months. I think you liquidated our children's entire college savings without telling me. I think you've lost nearly $500,000 on worthless cryptocurrencies. And I think you've been lying to me every single day about where you go and what you do." I turned the laptop screen toward him, showing him my detailed analysis of his CryptoMax account. His face went from pale to gray as he saw the scope of my investigation. "You don't understand," he said desperately. "This was supposed to be our way out. These investments, if they had paid off, we could have been millionaires. We could have paid for the kids, college, and had enough left over to retire early." "If they had paid off," I repeated. "Marcus, you gambled our children's futures on if you took money that was safely invested in diversified index funds and put it all on digital lottery tickets." "It's not gambling," he protested. "It's investing. I researched these projects. I read white papers and followed the developers. Mooncoin was supposed to revolutionize gaming. The potential was enormous." I stared at my husband, this man I'd thought I knew, and realized he was still deep in the grip of his addiction. Even confronted with the evidence of his losses, he was defending his choices and rationalizing his behavior. "Marcus," I said as gently as I could, "Mooncoin has lost 97% of its value. The developers haven't updated their website in months. You didn't invest in the future of gaming. You fell for a scam. The market is just down right now," he insisted. "Crypto is volatile. If we hold on, if we wait for the next bull run, we could recover everything and more." "With what money?" I asked. "You've already lost almost everything. And according to your account, you owe $34,000 in margin debt. If the market drops any further, they'll liquidate your positions automatically. Marcus looked shocked that I knew about the margin trading. How did you? Elena, you don't understand how this works. I understand perfectly, I said, my voice hardening. I'm a financial planner, remember? I understand risk and reward, diversification and speculation. What you did wasn't investing, it was gambling. And you've lost. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our new reality settling between us. Then Marcus tried a different approach. Look, he said, leaning forward earnestly. I know I should have told you about this sooner. I know I should have included you in these decisions. But I was trying to surprise you. I wanted to be the hero who set our family up for life. By risking our children's education? I asked incredulously. By lying to me for 8 months? By stealing money from accounts you knew I monitored? I didn't steal anything, he said, his voice rising slightly. Those are joint accounts. I have every right to make investment decisions. Not unilaterally, I shot back. Not without discussing it with me, and certainly not by liquidating the kids' college funds that we've been building for 15 years. Marcus was quiet again, and I could see him trying to formulate his next argument. I decided to cut him off before he could dig himself deeper. Here's what's going to happen, I said, closing my laptop. First, you're going to transfer what's left of your cryptocurrency holdings back to our bank account. All of it. Today. Elena, no, he said desperately. That would lock in our losses. If we just wait. If we wait, we'll lose everything, I interrupted. You're not making any more trades. You're not investing any more of our money. This stops now. You can't make me sell, he said, a stubborn edge creeping into his voice. Actually, I can, I said calmly. I've already changed the passwords on our bank accounts and added additional security measures. You can't transfer any more money to CryptoMax or any other exchange without my approval. And if you try to use credit cards or take out loans to fund more gambling, I'll file for divorce and report the previous transfers as financial fraud. Marcus stared at me, apparently realizing for the first time that I was serious. You would divorce me over this? I would divorce you over the lying, I said. The money is devastating, but it's recoverable. The trust you've broken might not be. Elena, please, he said, tears forming in his eyes. I love you. I love our family. I never meant for any of this to happen. But it did happen, I said, feeling my own tears threatening. And now we have to figure out how to move forward. I explained my conditions for staying in the marriage. Complete transparency about all financial accounts and investments, immediate liquidation of all cryptocurrency holdings, enrollment in a gambling addiction treatment program, and full disclosure to the children about what had happened to their college funds. Treatment? Marcus said. Elena, I don't have a gambling problem. I have an investment strategy that didn't work out. Marcus, I said, pulling up the transaction history on my laptop again, you made 847 cryptocurrency trades in 8 months. You were checking prices and making trades at 3 a.m. You lied to me about where you were going and what you were doing. You risked our children's futures on digital tokens that have no intrinsic value. That's not investing. That's addiction. The confrontation continued for another hour, with Marcus alternating between denial, anger, bargaining, and brief moments of what seemed like genuine remorse. But he never fully acknowledged the scope of his problem or committed to the changes I was demanding. Finally, exhausted and emotionally drained, I gave him an ultimatum. You have 24 hours to decide, I said. Either you agree to my conditions completely, or I'm filing for divorce and protecting whatever assets I can for the children's benefit. I won't let you gamble away our house or our retirement funds, too. You're being unreasonable, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. I'm being protective, I replied, of our children, of our future, and of what's left of our financial security. That night, Marcus slept in the guest room. I lay awake again, wondering how our marriage had come to this point. The man I'd fallen in love with 20 years ago had been responsible and thoughtful about money. He'd supported my financial planning career and shared my values about saving for the future and living within our means. Somewhere along the way, that man had been replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Someone who could lie to my face while destroying our children's futures. Someone who could justify gambling away our life savings as investing for our family. The next morning brought no resolution. Marcus left early for work, this time apparently actually going to his job, and didn't respond to my texts asking about his decision. I spent the day meeting with clients, trying to focus on helping other families plan their financial futures, while my own family's security lay in ruins. When I got home that evening, Marcus was already there, sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open. For a moment, I hoped he was liquidating his cryptocurrency positions as I'd demanded. Instead, he looked up at me with a mixture of defiance and desperation in his eyes. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, "and I think you're wrong about Mooncoin. I've been doing more research, and there are signs that it might be making a comeback." My heart sank. Not only had Marcus failed to accept my ultimatum, but he'd spent the day deeper in his addiction, researching ways to justify holding on to his losing investments. "Marcus," I said quietly, "what you're describing is called confirmation bias. You're looking for information that supports what you want to believe while ignoring evidence that contradicts it." "No," he said firmly. "Look at this chart. Mooncoin is up 15% today. And there's chatter on Reddit about a new partnership announcement coming soon." I looked at his laptop screen, which showed various cryptocurrency tracking websites and forum discussions. Marcus had spent his day diving deeper into the rabbit hole that had already cost our family so much. A 15% increase on a coin that's down 97% is meaningless, I said. That's going from 3 cents to 3.5 cents. "It's still worthless." "You don't understand the technology," Marcus insisted. "Blockchain is the future. Cryptocurrency is going to transform everything. We're early adopters. We just need to be patient." I realized then that Marcus wasn't just addicted to gambling. He was addicted to the fantasy of becoming wealthy without effort, to the idea that he could outsmart the market and become our family's financial savior. He was so invested in that identity that he couldn't accept the reality of his losses. "I can see that you've made your decision," I said sadly, "and now I have to make mine." The look of panic that crossed Marcus's face told me that some part of him understood what was about to happen. But instead of backing down, he doubled down on his delusions. "Elena, you're making a huge mistake," he said. "In 5 years, when Mooncoin is worth hundreds of dollars per coin, you'll realize I was right. You'll thank me for having the vision to see the future. You'll thank me later," I repeated, the phrase that would haunt our family forever. "That's what you said when I first confronted you about this." "Because it's true," Marcus said. "I'm trying to set our family up for generational wealth." "You've set our family up for generational debt," I replied. "But I'm not going to let you take us down with you." That night, I made the phone calls I'd been dreading. First to Carmen, who listened as I explained Marcus's continued refusal to acknowledge his problem. Then to a divorce attorney whose name I'd gotten from a colleague. And finally to our children. Isabella and Diego were out with friends, but I asked them to come home early. They deserved to know what was happening to their family and their futures. They deserved to understand why their college plans might need to change. The hardest conversation of my life was about to begin. Isabella arrived home first, her face flushed from the Arizona heat and her shift at the bookstore. She took one look at my expression and immediately knew something was wrong. "Mom, what happened?" she asked, dropping her purse by the door. "You look like someone died." The irony of her words wasn't lost on me. In many ways, someone had died. The father she thought she knew, the husband I thought I'd married, the family's financial future we'd all believed in. All of it was gone, replaced by something I was still struggling to understand. "Sit down, sweetheart," I said, gesturing to our living room couch. "We need to wait for your brother, and then your father and I need to talk to you both about something important." Isabella's eyes widened with concern. At 17, she was mature enough to recognize the gravity in my voice, but young enough to immediately assume the worst. "Are you and Dad getting divorced?" The question hit me like a physical blow. 3 days ago, I would have laughed at the suggestion. Marcus and I had what I thought was a solid marriage, built on shared values and mutual respect. We rarely fought about money because we'd always been aligned on our financial goals. We supported each other's careers and made major decisions together. Now, I wasn't sure if any of that had been real, or just an elaborate performance Marcus had been putting on while living a secret life. "Let's wait for Diego," I said, avoiding her question but probably answering it anyway. Diego burst through the front door 20 minutes later, still in his soccer practice clothes, his hair damp with sweat. "Sorry I'm late," he called out. "Coach kept us running drills. What's the emergency?" Marcus appeared from upstairs, having changed out of his work clothes into jeans and a t-shirt. He looked nervous, but was trying to project calm confidence. I wondered if this was how he'd looked every day for the past 8 months, performing normalcy while his secret world burned around him. We gathered in the living room, the kids on the couch, Marcus and I in separate chairs facing them. The seating arrangement alone probably told them everything they needed to know about the state of our marriage. "Your father has something he needs to tell you," I began, looking directly at Marcus. We'd agreed on this approach during a tense phone conversation that afternoon. He would tell them about the cryptocurrency investments, and I would explain the financial implications. Marcus cleared his throat, his hands fidgeting with his wedding ring. "Kids, I need to tell you about some financial decisions I've made recently. Decisions that I should have discussed with your mother, and decisions that affect your college plans." Isabella leaned forward, her journalist instincts already sensing a story. Diego looked confused, glancing between his parents with growing concern. "Over the past few months," Marcus continued, "I've been investing in cryptocurrency, digital currencies that I believed would increase dramatically in value. I thought I could grow our family's wealth and secure our financial future." "That sounds like a good thing," Diego said slowly. "Why do you both look so upset?" Marcus's voice cracked slightly as he continued. "The investments didn't perform as I expected. In fact, they've lost most of their value, and the money I used for these investments came from your college savings accounts." The silence that followed was deafening. Isabella's face went through a series of expressions, confusion giving way to understanding, then to horror. Diego just stared at his father, apparently unable to process what he'd just heard. "What do you mean? Our college savings?" Isabella asked, her voice very quiet. I pulled out the printed statements I'd prepared, the ones showing the zeroed 529 accounts. "Your father liquidated both of your education funds in January, $340,000 total. The money is gone." Diego found his voice first. "Gone? What do you mean, gone?" "I mean the cryptocurrency investments your father made have lost 97% of their value," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What was once $340,000 is now worth about $9,000. Isabella stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. "Northwestern costs $60,000 a year, without the college fund." She turned back to face us, tears starting in her eyes. "I can't afford to go to Northwestern." "Now wait," Marcus said quickly. "That's not necessarily true. The cryptocurrency market is volatile. These investments could recover. They could even exceed their original value." "Could?" I said sharply. "Marcus, stop. You've already gambled away their futures. Don't make this worse by giving them false hope." Diego was doing math in his head, something he'd always been good at. "My scholarship covers tuition, but not room and board. That's like $15,000 a year. Without the college fund, I'd have to take out massive loans or live at home and commute." I finished for him, which is still an option, but not what we'd planned. The kids looked at each other, then back at their father. I could see them trying to reconcile the responsible man who'd raised them with the person who'd just destroyed their educational opportunities. "Why didn't you tell us?" Isabella asked, her voice rising. "Why didn't you tell Mom? How could you risk our futures without even asking us?" Marcus launched into the same justifications he'd been giving me. The potential for massive returns, the revolutionary nature of blockchain technology, his research into various projects. But to his children, who knew nothing about cryptocurrency except what they'd heard in the news about scams and crashes, it sounded like exactly what it was. Gambling addiction dressed up as investment strategy. "Dad," Diego said finally, "this sounds like those stories about people who lose their houses in Vegas." "It's not gambling," Marcus insisted, but with less conviction than he'd shown with me. "It's investing in emerging technology. Emerging technology that lost 97% of its value, Isabella said, in 3 months. The conversation continued for over an hour, with Marcus alternating between defending his decisions and apologizing for the secrecy. The kids asked hard questions about our family's current financial position, their college options, and whether we'd be able to keep the house. I answered as honestly as I could. We weren't bankrupt, but we were financially vulnerable in ways we'd never been before. The emergency fund was gone. The vacation money was gone. We had equity in the house and our retirement accounts were intact, but those weren't meant to fund college educations. What happens now? Diego asked as the conversation wound down. I looked at Marcus, giving him one more chance to step up and take responsibility. When he remained silent, I answered for our family. Now we figure out how to move forward, I said. You'll both still go to college, but we may need to explore different options. Community college for the first 2 years, in-state schools, larger student loans. We'll make it work. And Dad? Isabella asked. What about his gambling problem? Marcus started to object to the characterization, but I cut him off. Your father is going to get help for his addiction, and we're going to work together to make sure this never happens again. After the kids went to their rooms, processing this new reality, Marcus and I had our second major confrontation. He was angry that I'd called his behavior an addiction in front of the children. I was angry that he still couldn't acknowledge the scope of what he'd done. You made me look like a villain in front of my own kids, he said. You made yourself look like a villain, I replied. I just told them the truth. Your version of the truth, he shot back. You're painting this as some kind of disease, like I'm a drug addict or an alcoholic. Aren't you? I asked. Marcus, you've been lying to your family for 8 months. You've been making secret financial decisions that you know would devastate us if they failed. You've been checking cryptocurrency prices in the middle of the night and making trades when you should be sleeping. You've been choosing gambling over your children's futures. What would you call that? He didn't have an answer, but he also didn't back down. Instead, he retreated to his laptop and spent the rest of the evening researching cryptocurrency markets and reading forums full of other people who'd convinced themselves that their massive losses were just temporary setbacks. That night, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of our crisis. I wasn't going to wait for Marcus to acknowledge his problem or agree to treatment. I was going to conduct my own investigation into the full scope of his gambling and prepare for the possibility that our marriage wouldn't survive this betrayal. The next morning, after Marcus left for work, actually for work this time according to a follow-up call I made to his office, I drove to our bank. As joint account holders, I had access to all our statements and transaction histories, but I wanted to review everything in person with a banking professional who might catch details I'd missed. Sarah Martinez, our personal banker for the past 6 years, greeted me with the warm professionalism I'd come to expect. But her expression grew concerned as I explained what I needed. I'm reviewing all of our account activity for the past year, I said. I need to understand every transfer, every withdrawal, every unusual transaction. Sarah pulled up our accounts on her computer, and we spent the next 2 hours going through everything chronologically. What emerged was a pattern of increasingly desperate financial behavior that painted Marcus's addiction in stark detail. The cryptocurrency investments had started small in August of the previous year. A $500 transfer to something called Coinbase, followed by another $300 transfer 2 weeks later. Nothing unusual enough to catch my attention at the time, especially since Marcus often handled online bill payments and small transfers. But by October, the amounts had grown larger and more frequent. $2,000 transfers every few days, always to different cryptocurrency exchanges. CryptoMax, Binance, Kraken, platforms I'd never heard of. Sarah explained that these were all legitimate exchanges, but the pattern of transfers was unusual. Most people who invest in cryptocurrency make larger, less frequent purchases, she said. This pattern, small frequent transfers, is more typical of day trading or speculative gambling. November and December showed escalation. Marcus was transferring money almost daily, sometimes multiple times per day. The amounts ranged from $500 to $5,000, and he was using multiple funding sources. Our checking account, our savings account, even a line of credit he'd opened without telling me. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Sarah said gently, "I'm required to ask, were you aware of all these transfers when they were happening?" I shook my head. I trusted my husband to handle our day-to-day banking. I review our monthly statements, but I don't monitor every transaction in real time. "I understand," she said. "But moving forward, you might want to set up alerts for any transaction over a certain amount. That way you'll be notified immediately if there's unusual activity." We implemented those alerts immediately, setting them for any transaction over $500. If Marcus tried to gamble away more of our money, I'd know about it within minutes. The most damaging revelations came when we reviewed January and February. The $340,000 college fund liquidation was just the beginning. Marcus had also opened a margin trading account, essentially borrowing money against his cryptocurrency holdings to make even larger bets. "This is concerning," Sarah said, pointing to a series of transactions in March. "He transferred $15,000 from your emergency fund to cover margin calls. When cryptocurrency positions lose value while you're trading on margin, you have to deposit more money or the exchange will automatically sell your holdings at a loss." I felt sick. Not only had Marcus lost our children's college money, but he'd then borrowed against those losing investments to gamble away our emergency fund trying to cover his debts. "How much margin debt does he currently have?" I asked. Sarah couldn't access the CryptoMax account directly, but based on the transfer patterns, she estimated Marcus owed at least $30,000 in margin debt, possibly more. If the cryptocurrency market continues to decline, she warned, he could face additional margin calls. And if he can't meet them, the exchange will liquidate his positions automatically, locking in his losses. I left the bank with a comprehensive folder of transaction records and a much clearer picture of Marcus's addiction. This wasn't just poor investment judgment. This was a systematic pattern of deception and escalating financial risk-taking that had consumed our family's savings and put us in debt. My next stop was the office of Patricia Chen, a divorce attorney recommended by a colleague. I wasn't ready to file for divorce, but I needed to understand my legal options and how to protect what remained of our assets. Patricia's office was in a high-rise downtown, with a view of the mountains that surrounded Phoenix. She was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 40s, with an air of competent professionalism that immediately put me at ease. "Tell me about your situation," she said after we'd settled in her conference room. I explained everything, from the secret cryptocurrency gambling to the liquidated college funds to Marcus's continued refusal to acknowledge his addiction. Patricia took detailed notes, asking clarifying questions about our assets, debts, and the timeline of Marcus's deception. "In Arizona, we have community property laws," she explained when I'd finished. "That means both spouses have equal rights to marital assets, but also equal responsibility for marital debts. The good news is that Marcus couldn't legally liquidate those college funds without your consent. The bad news is that proving lack of consent after the fact is complicated." "What are my options?" I asked. "You have several," she said, pulling out a legal pad. "First, you could file for divorce immediately and seek to recoup the lost funds as part of the property settlement. Second, you could file for legal separation, which would protect your future earnings and assets from his gambling while keeping the marriage intact. Third, you could attempt to work things out privately but implement legal protections to prevent future unauthorized transfers. Each option had pros and cons. Divorce would be emotionally devastating for the children and might not actually recover the lost money. Legal separation would protect me financially but could push Marcus deeper into his addiction. Private resolution required Marcus to acknowledge his problem and commit to change, something he hadn't shown any willingness to do. There's also the question of criminal liability," Patricia said. "Unauthorized use of joint accounts isn't typically prosecuted between spouses, but if Marcus opened accounts or took out loans using your identity without permission, that could constitute fraud." I hadn't considered that possibility. How would I know if he'd done something like that? "Credit report," she said immediately. "You should pull your credit report and review every account, every inquiry, every line of credit. If Marcus has been desperate enough to gamble away your children's college funds, he might have been desperate enough to open unauthorized accounts." She gave me the information I needed to access my credit report online, and we scheduled a follow-up appointment for the following week. By then, I'd have a complete picture of our financial situation and could make informed decisions about how to proceed. Driving home, I felt simultaneously empowered and terrified. I was taking control of our family's financial security, but I was also preparing for the possible end of my marriage. The man I'd loved for nearly 2 decades had become someone I didn't recognize, someone I couldn't trust with our family's future. That evening, I sat in my home office, reviewing my credit report, while Marcus was supposedly at a work meeting. What I found made my stomach drop. 3 new credit cards, all opened in my name over the past 4 months. 2 personal loans, totaling $45,000, also in my name. A home equity line of credit for $75,000, secured against our house, that I'd never seen or signed for. Marcus hadn't just gambled away our savings. He'd been committing identity fraud, using my credit and our home as collateral for his addiction. The total additional debt was over $150,000, all of it tied to my name and credit score. I screenshot everything and immediately called Patricia Chen's emergency line. "This changes everything," she said after I'd explained what I'd found. "This is criminal fraud, and you need to report it immediately, not just to protect yourself financially, but to create a legal record of Marcus's behavior." I spent the next hour on the phone with credit reporting agencies, flagging the unauthorized accounts and beginning the process of disputing the fraudulent debt. It would take weeks or months to resolve, but at least I'd started the paper trail that would protect me from Marcus's crimes. The hardest part was accepting that my husband, the father of my children, was not just a gambling addict but also a criminal who'd been stealing my identity to fund his addiction. The man I'd trusted with my heart, my family, and my financial future had been systematically betraying all of it. When Marcus came home that night, I was waiting for him with printouts of the credit report and a voice recorder. "We need to talk," I said, gesturing for him to sit at the kitchen table. "Elena, I'm tired," he said. "Can this wait until tomorrow?" "No," I said firmly. "It can't wait." I spread the credit report printouts across the table, highlighting the unauthorized accounts. Marcus's face went through the same progression I'd experienced earlier, confusion giving way to understanding, then to panic. "I can explain." He started, but I held up my hand. "Before you say anything else," I said, "I want you to know that I'm recording this conversation, and I've already reported the identity fraud to the credit agencies and will be filing a police report tomorrow." "Police report?" Marcus said, his voice rising. "Elena, these aren't fraud. I'm your husband. I have the right to—" "You have the right to use joint accounts that we both agreed to open," I interrupted. "You do not have the right to open credit cards and loans in my name without my knowledge or consent. You do not have the right to forge my signature on loan documents. You do not have the right to use our house as collateral without my agreement." Marcus stared at the documents, apparently realizing for the first time the legal jeopardy he'd created for himself. When someone is deep in addiction, they often lose sight of the line between acceptable and criminal behavior. Marcus had crossed that line months ago and kept going. "I was trying to save us," he said weakly. "The margin calls were going to liquidate everything. I thought if I could just get enough capital to weather the downturn, we could recover all of our losses." "By committing felony fraud," I said. "Marcus, do you understand what you've done? You've stolen my identity. You've put our house at risk. You've accumulated over $150,000 in debt that I never agreed to and might not be able to discharge in bankruptcy." "It's not theft if we're married," he protested, but he sounded uncertain. "Yes, it is," I said. "Spousal identity theft is a crime in Arizona. And given the amounts involved, it's a felony." We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of our new reality settling between us. Marcus wasn't just a gambling addict who'd made poor decisions with our money. He was a criminal who'd been systematically defrauding his own family to fuel his addiction. "What happens now?" he asked finally. "Now you have a choice," I said. "You can voluntarily surrender all the fraudulent credit cards and loan documents. Help me work with the creditors to resolve this mess. Enter a gambling addiction treatment program. and commit to complete transparency about our finances going forward. Or I can press charges, file for divorce, and let the criminal justice system handle your addiction." "You would really have me arrested?" he asked. "I would really protect my children's future from further damage," I replied. "If that means having you arrested, then yes." Marcus looked defeated, older than his 43 years, worn down by months of secret stress and the weight of his lies finally catching up with him. For a moment, I saw a glimpse of the man I'd married, vulnerable and scared beneath the addiction that had consumed him. "I don't know how to stop," he said quietly. "I keep thinking the next trade will be the one that saves us. The next coin will be the one that makes us rich. I know it's crazy, but I can't stop believing that I can fix this." It was the first honest thing Marcus had said to me in months, and it broke my heart even as it confirmed my worst fears. He was so deep in his addiction that he couldn't see reality anymore. He genuinely believed that more gambling was the solution to the problems caused by his gambling. "That's why you need professional help," I said gently. "This isn't something you can overcome alone, and it's not something I can fix for you. You need therapy specifically designed for gambling addiction." Marcus nodded slowly, tears forming in his eyes. "What about the kids? What do I tell them about the credit cards and loans?" "We tell them the truth," I said. "That your addiction escalated to criminal behavior, and that we're working to resolve it legally and financially." "They'll hate me," he said. "They might," I agreed. "But they'll hate you more if they find out later that we lied to them again." The conversation ended with Marcus agreeing to my conditions, at least verbally. He would surrender the fraudulent accounts, cooperate with the dispute process, and enter treatment. But I'd learned not to trust his promises. I would verify everything, and prepare for the possibility that he'd continue lying even now. Over the next week, I discovered that Marcus's addiction was even worse than I'd initially realized. The private investigator I hired, recommended by Patricia Chen, uncovered additional cryptocurrency accounts on platforms I'd never heard of. The total gambling losses exceeded $600,000, and Marcus had been using multiple identities and addresses to circumvent platform limits on deposits and trades. He'd been living a completely double life, with secret email accounts, hidden phone apps, and an elaborate system for tracking his various investments and debts. His laptop history showed that he'd been spending 6 to 8 hours per day researching cryptocurrencies, reading trading forums, and making transactions. "This is one of the most severe cases of cryptocurrency addiction I've encountered," said Dr. James Wright, the addiction specialist I consulted. "Your husband has all the classic signs of pathological gambling, but the 24/7 nature of cryptocurrency markets has accelerated his deterioration." Dr. Wright explained that cryptocurrency addiction was particularly dangerous because, unlike traditional gambling, there was no closing time. Markets operated around the clock, and addicts could make trades at any hour from anywhere with an internet connection. "The technology also creates a false sense of expertise," he said. "People read white papers and watch YouTube videos and convince themselves they're investors rather than gamblers. The complexity of blockchain technology provides cover for what is essentially betting on random price movements." Marcus had agreed to enter treatment, but Dr. Wright warned me that recovery would be a long process, possibly years, and that relapses were common. He also suggested that I attend support groups for families affected by gambling addiction. "You've been traumatized too," he said. "Financial betrayal within a marriage creates a form of PTSD that requires its own healing process." The support group met weekly at a community center near downtown Phoenix. The first meeting I attended was both heartbreaking and reassuring. 8 other people, mostly women, all dealing with the aftermath of partners who'd gambled away family assets. There was Maria, whose husband had lost their retirement savings on sports betting. Janet, whose wife had accumulated $80,000 in credit card debt playing online poker. Robert, whose partner had taken out multiple loans against their business to invest in cryptocurrency. Each story was different in its details, but similar in its emotional impact. The lies, the betrayal, the gradual realization that the person they'd trusted with their hearts and finances had been living a secret life of addiction. "The hardest part," said Janet during one session, "is accepting that the person you married is still in there somewhere, but they've been hijacked by this disease. You're not just fighting for your marriage. You're fighting for their life. Through the support group, I learned about the warning signs I'd missed and the recovery resources available to our family. I also learned that my response to Marcus's betrayal, while emotionally devastating, was relatively measured compared to what some families had endured. You caught it before he lost the house, Maria pointed out, and you acted quickly to protect your assets. Some of us weren't so fortunate. 2 weeks after Marcus entered outpatient treatment, I made a decision that surprised even me. Instead of filing for divorce, I decided to give our marriage one more chance. Not because I'd forgiven the betrayal, but because I'd learned enough about addiction to understand that Marcus was sick rather than simply selfish. But this chance came with non-negotiable conditions. Marcus would attend therapy 3 times per week for at least 6 months. He would surrender all access to our financial accounts and allow me to monitor all his financial activity. He would find a new job if his current employer couldn't provide adequate support for his recovery. Most importantly, he would be completely honest with our children about his addiction and the financial damage he'd caused. No minimizing, no justifying, no false promises about quick recoveries. The conversation with Isabella and Diego about the full scope of their father's gambling was one of the most difficult of my life. But it was also necessary. They were almost adults, and they deserved to understand the real situation facing our family. "So we're not just behind on college savings," Isabella said after I'd explained about the fraudulent debts. "We're actually in debt because of Dad's gambling." "That's right," I said. "But we're working to resolve the fraudulent accounts, and we have a plan for moving forward." Diego was quieter, processing the information in his methodical way. "How long will it take Dad to get better?" he asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Addiction recovery is a lifelong process. Some people manage it successfully, others struggle for years. What I can promise you is that we'll face this as a family, and we'll find ways to make your college dreams happen regardless." Both kids asked hard questions about whether Marcus and I would stay married, whether we'd lose the house, and how much their college plans would need to change. I answered everything as honestly as I could, acknowledging uncertainty where it existed but emphasizing our commitment to their futures. The financial recovery plan I developed with our new financial advisor, someone who specialized in families affected by gambling addiction, was sobering but manageable. We'd need to refinance the house to consolidate some of the debt. The kids would need to take on more student loans and consider less expensive college options for at least their first 2 years. Isabella decided to defer Northwestern for a year and attend Phoenix Community College, then transfer as a junior. It would save us nearly $100,000 while still allowing her to pursue journalism. Diego chose to stay at ASU but live at home for his first 2 years, using his savings from his part-time job to help with expenses. Both decisions broke my heart because they represented dreams deferred due to their father's addiction, but both kids handled the changes with maturity and grace that made me proud, even in the midst of our crisis. "It's not the end of the world," Isabella said when we finalized her new college plans. "I'll still become a journalist. It'll just take a different path. And I'll still play soccer and study engineering," Diego added. Living at home for a couple years might actually be nice. Their resilience in the face of their father's betrayal was remarkable, but it also worried me. I didn't want them to feel responsible for managing the family's emotional recovery or minimizing their own disappointment to protect the adults around them. 6 months after the initial discovery, our family had settled into a new normal that was both fragile and hopeful. Marcus was making progress in treatment, having admitted the full scope of his addiction and committed to the long process of recovery. The fraudulent debts were being resolved through legal channels, though it would take years to fully clear our credit. Most importantly, we were learning to live with radical honesty about our finances and our relationship. Marcus provided daily reports on his whereabouts and activities. I managed all financial decisions and maintained complete transparency with the kids about our situation. It wasn't the marriage I'd thought I had, but it was potentially the foundation for something stronger and more authentic. We were building new trust slowly, one honest conversation at a time. But as I would soon discover, Marcus's recovery wasn't as solid as it appeared on the surface. The cryptocurrency markets don't sleep, and neither do the obsessions they create in vulnerable minds. The worst crisis of our ordeal was still to come. The phone call that shattered our fragile recovery came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in October, 8 months after I'd first discovered Marcus's cryptocurrency gambling. I was pulled from deep sleep by the aggressive buzzing of my cell phone, and my first thought was that something had happened to one of the kids. Instead, it was Marcus calling from the Maricopa County Jail. "Elena?" His voice was shaky, barely recognizable. "I need you to come get me. I've been arrested." I sat up in bed, instantly awake, my heart pounding. "Arrested for what?" "Marcus, where are you?" "Downtown jail," he said. "They're charging me with embezzlement. From my company." "Elena, I can explain everything, but I need you to call a lawyer and post bail." The line went quiet except for background noise, other inmates making their own desperate phone calls in the middle of the night. I looked at the empty space in our bed where Marcus should have been sleeping. I'd thought he was working late again, another project deadline he'd mentioned over dinner. "How much money?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "The bail is $50,000, he said. "But Elena, the charges—" "They're saying I took $180,000 from the company accounts." I hung up the phone and sat in the darkness of our bedroom, trying to process what I'd just heard. After 8 months of therapy, support groups, and careful financial monitoring, Marcus had not only relapsed into gambling, but had escalated to stealing from his employer. Everything we'd worked to rebuild was about to collapse again. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't surprised or devastated by his betrayal. I was angry. I called Patricia Chen's emergency number, leaving a detailed voicemail about Marcus's arrest and the embezzlement charges. Then I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, waiting for morning so I could begin the process of protecting my children from the final phase of their father's self-destruction. At 6 a.m., I woke Isabella and Diego and told them their father had been arrested. They took the news with the weary resignation of teenagers who'd already lost faith in their father's ability to stay sober. "Is he going to prison?" Diego asked matter-of-factly. "I don't know yet," I said. "But we need to prepare for that possibility." Isabella, who'd been thriving at community college and had secured a part-time internship at a local newspaper, just nodded. "Are we going to be okay financially?" "Yes," I said with more confidence than I felt. "Whatever happens with your father, we're going to be okay." Patricia Chen called back at 8 a.m. with preliminary information about the charges. Marcus had been under investigation by his company's fraud department for 6 weeks. They discovered a pattern of unauthorized transfers from client accounts to cryptocurrency exchanges, all traced back to Marcus's computer and access credentials. "The evidence is substantial," Patricia explained. Security camera footage of him making the transfers, digital forensics showing the money went directly to his CryptoMax account, and records of him trying to cover his tracks by falsifying client reports. The total amount was actually closer to $220,000, stolen over a period of 4 months while he was supposedly in recovery. Marcus had been attending therapy sessions, participating in support groups, and presenting himself as committed to sobriety while simultaneously planning and executing an even more sophisticated gambling scheme. "This changes everything about your legal position," Patricia warned. "If Marcus is convicted of felony embezzlement, you could be considered complicit if you post his bail or provide financial support for his defense." I wasn't going to post his bail anyway. That decision had crystallized the moment I'd hung up on his phone call from jail. Marcus had burned through every chance I'd given him, betrayed every promise he'd made, and now endangered our family's future in ways that couldn't be undone. "I want to file for divorce immediately," I told Patricia. "And I want full custody of the children with no financial responsibility for Marcus's criminal defense or restitution." "That's probably wise," she agreed. Given the federal nature of some of these charges, Marcus could be facing significant prison time. "You need to protect yourself and your children." The next few days passed in a blur of legal consultations, difficult conversations with the kids, and the surreal experience of watching my husband's arrest make the local news. Marcus worked for a prominent Phoenix tech company, and his embezzlement case was covered by several media outlets as an example of cryptocurrency addiction destroying white-collar families. The kids handled the publicity better than I'd expected. Isabella's journalism instincts kicked in, and she actually wrote a thoughtful editorial for her college newspaper about financial crime and family trauma. Diego focused on his studies and soccer, using athletics as an outlet for the stress and anger he couldn't fully express. But the revelation that hurt the most came when I discovered how Marcus had concealed his relapse from our family and his treatment providers. Dr. Wright, Marcus's addiction counselor, was as shocked as I was by the embezzlement charges. During our emergency session, he revealed that Marcus had been presenting himself as a model recovery patient, while secretly planning his return to gambling. He attended every session, participated in group discussions, and even sponsored a newcomer to the program, Dr. Wright explained. His manipulation was so sophisticated that he fooled experienced addiction professionals. Marcus had been using his company laptop to research cryptocurrency markets during work hours, slowly identifying which client accounts had the largest balances and the least frequent monitoring. He'd studied the company's internal audit procedures and timed his thefts to coincide with periods when oversight was minimal. This level of premeditation indicates that his addiction had progressed to something much more serious, Dr. Wright said. He wasn't just gambling compulsively. He was engaging in calculated criminal behavior to fund his gambling. The psychological evaluation ordered by the court painted an even darker picture. Marcus showed signs of antisocial personality disorder, narcissistic traits, and complete inability to accept responsibility for his actions. Even faced with overwhelming evidence of his crimes, he continued to blame external factors and minimize his role in our family's destruction. He told the evaluator that you were being unreasonable about his investment strategies, Dr. Wright reported with obvious frustration. Even now, facing prison time, he describes his gambling as misunderstood entrepreneurship. I realized then that the man I'd married was either gone completely or had never existed in the first place. The Marcus sitting in jail wasn't a good man struggling with addiction. He was someone who'd been willing to destroy his family, steal from his employer, and manipulate everyone around him to feed his gambling obsession. The divorce proceedings moved quickly given Marcus's incarceration and criminal charges. He couldn't contest custody when he was facing years in federal prison, and the evidence of financial fraud made property division straightforward. I would keep the house, the retirement accounts, and responsibility for our children. Marcus would keep his debts, his criminal charges, and whatever remained of his worthless cryptocurrency portfolio. The day I signed the final divorce papers, I felt relief rather than sadness. I was officially free from Marcus's financial crimes and could begin rebuilding our family's security without fear of further sabotage. But the kids struggled more with the divorce than they'd shown during the crisis. Isabella had nightmares about financial instability and developed anxiety about money that required counseling. Diego became withdrawn and angry, blaming himself for not recognizing his father's problems earlier. I should have known something was wrong, he said during one of our family therapy sessions. I lived in the same house. How did I miss that Dad was stealing money? Because he didn't want you to see it. Our family therapist, Dr. Sandra Martinez, explained. Adults with addiction become very skilled at compartmentalizing their behavior and hiding it from people they love. Dr. Martinez helped us understand that we'd all been victims of Marcus's manipulation, not willing participants who should have seen through his deception. Isabella's nightmares began to fade as she learned to separate her father's financial crimes from her own sense of security. Diego's anger transformed into determination to never repeat his father's mistakes. The criminal trial began 6 months after Marcus's arrest. I attended every day, not to support Marcus but to witness the full truth of what he'd done to our family and his employer. The prosecutor laid out a methodical case showing how Marcus had stolen from 14 different client accounts, falsified records to cover his tracks, and used company resources to research his cryptocurrency investments. The most damning evidence was Marcus's own computer history, which showed him researching, quote, how to steal from employer without getting caught, and, quote, cryptocurrency money laundering techniques. He'd been planning his crimes for months while attending therapy and pretending to work on his recovery. Marcus's defense attorney tried to argue that addiction was a mitigating factor, that his client's gambling problem had driven him to desperate measures. But the prosecutor countered with evidence of Marcus's calculated planning and his continued denial of responsibility. This wasn't a moment of weakness, the prosecutor argued. This was a sustained criminal conspiracy against his employer and his family. Mr. Rodriguez spent more time planning these thefts than many people spend planning their careers. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Marcus never testified on his own behalf, probably because his lawyer knew he couldn't be trusted to tell the truth, even under oath. When the guilty verdict was read, Marcus showed no emotion. He'd been living in denial for so long that reality couldn't penetrate his delusions. The judge sentenced Marcus to 7 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. He would also be required to pay full restitution to his former employer, though with no assets and no income prospects, that money would likely never be recovered. Mr. Rodriguez, the judge said during sentencing, you have destroyed your family's financial security, betrayed your employer's trust, and shown no genuine remorse for your actions. Your gambling addiction may explain your behavior, but it doesn't excuse it. After the sentencing, I stood outside the courthouse with Isabella and Diego, watching news crews pack up their equipment. The cameras and reporters were moving on to other stories, but our family would be dealing with the consequences of Marcus's choices for years to come. How do you feel? Isabella asked me as we walked to our car. Free, I said honestly. For the first time in over a year, I feel completely free. The road to recovery for our family was long and sometimes difficult, but it was also filled with unexpected discoveries about our own strength and resilience. Without Marcus's financial sabotage hanging over us, I was able to rebuild our savings and security more quickly than I'd thought possible. My financial planning practice actually grew during this period, as word spread about my personal experience with financial recovery after fraud. Clients who'd experienced similar betrayals sought out my services, knowing I understood both the practical and emotional challenges they faced. Isabella thrived at community college and was accepted to transfer to Arizona State University's journalism program with a scholarship that covered most of her tuition. She wrote her college application essay about financial resilience and family recovery, turning her father's betrayal into a powerful narrative about overcoming adversity. Diego continued to excel academically and athletically, earning a full scholarship to ASU's engineering program by his junior year. He started a support group for college students whose families had been affected by parental addiction, channeling his experience into helping others. But the most significant change was in how we functioned as a family. Without the constant stress of Marcus's lies and financial manipulation, we developed deeper, more honest relationships with each other. We talked openly about money, made financial decisions together, and built the kind of transparent communication that had been impossible while Marcus was actively gambling. 2 years after Marcus's imprisonment, I met David Chen, a divorced father of 2, who worked as a high school math teacher. David had experienced his own financial betrayal when his ex-wife had accumulated massive credit card debt without his knowledge, so he understood the trust issues that came with rebuilding after financial trauma. Our relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and complete financial transparency. David wasn't threatened by my success or my need to maintain independence. He understood that trust had to be earned through consistent actions over time, not promises or grand gestures. When David and I married, we kept our finances completely separate for the first year, gradually combining some accounts only after extensive discussions and legal agreements. The kids loved David's steady presence and his genuine interest in their lives and futures. Isabella graduated from ASU summa cum laude and was accepted to graduate school at Northwestern, the school she'd originally planned to attend as an undergraduate. This time, she was able to pay for it herself, through scholarships, savings, and a graduate assistantship that covered her living expenses. Diego completed his engineering degree and was recruited by several major technology companies. He chose to work for a renewable energy startup, motivated by his desire to build something positive rather than just accumulate wealth. He often said that watching his father destroy everything for money had taught him what really mattered in life. 3 years after Marcus's sentencing, I received a letter from him in prison. It was the first communication we'd had since his arrest, and I almost threw it away without reading it. But curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it while sitting in my office on a quiet Saturday morning. The letter was rambling and filled with the same justifications and blame-shifting that had characterized Marcus's behavior throughout our crisis. He wrote about how the cryptocurrency market had finally turned around, how his original investments would have made us millionaires if I'd just been patient. He blamed me for his embezzlement, saying that my financial restrictions had forced him to find alternative funding sources. But what struck me most was his complete inability to acknowledge the real damage he'd caused. He wrote about his children as if they were still young and naive, not successful college students who'd learned to thrive despite his betrayal. He wrote about our marriage as if it had been a temporary misunderstanding, rather than a systematic pattern of lies and financial abuse. I showed the letter to Dr. Martinez during one of our periodic family check-ins. She'd continued to work with us even after the acute crisis had passed, helping us process the long-term effects of trauma and build healthy relationship patterns. "This letter tells you everything you need to know about whether Marcus has actually changed," she said after reading it. "Someone who's genuinely in recovery would take responsibility for their actions and focus on the harm they've caused, rather than defending their choices." I never replied to Marcus's letter, and I never heard from him again. But the letter served a valuable purpose in confirming that I'd made the right decisions for our family. Marcus wasn't a good man who'd been temporarily corrupted by addiction. He was someone whose fundamental character had been revealed under pressure, and that character was selfish, manipulative, and destructive. 5 years after the initial discovery of Marcus's gambling, our family gathered to celebrate Diego's college graduation. We stood together on the ASU campus, Isabella with her journalism degree and her new job at a Phoenix television station, Diego with his engineering degree and his job offer from the renewable energy company, and David and me with our quiet satisfaction at having helped them reach this moment. As I watched my children walk across the stage to receive their diplomas, I thought about how different this day would have been if Marcus's gambling had succeeded in destroying our family's future. Both kids would have been crushed by debt, their dreams deferred or abandoned, their faith in family loyalty permanently damaged. Instead, they'd learned resilience, financial responsibility, and the importance of honest communication. They'd seen that recovery was possible even after devastating betrayal, and they'd developed the kind of character that would serve them well in whatever challenges lay ahead. "Thank you for saving us," Isabella said quietly as we watched Diego pose for photos with his engineering classmates. "You saved yourselves," I replied. "I just gave you the space to do it." That evening, as we celebrated at Diego's favorite restaurant, I reflected on the long journey from that terrible morning when I'd first discovered the zeroed college accounts to this moment of triumph and restoration. The path hadn't been easy, and there had been times when I'd wondered if our family would survive the trauma intact. But we'd emerged stronger and more authentic than we'd been before the crisis. We'd learned that financial security comes not from the amount of money you have, but from the trust and communication you build with the people you love. We'd learned that addiction can destroy even the strongest families, but it doesn't have to destroy them permanently if the healthy members are willing to fight for recovery. Most importantly, we'd learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to stop enabling destructive behavior and start protecting the people who deserve protection. My decision to divorce Marcus and shield my children from his continued gambling hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. As we drove home that night, David reached over and squeezed my hand. "Proud of you," he said simply. "Proud of all of us," I replied, looking at my children in the rearview mirror as they planned their post-graduation adventures. 6 months later, I received a call from the federal prison where Marcus was serving his sentence. He'd been found dead in his cell, apparently from a heart attack. He was 49 years old. The kids took the news of their father's death with the same mature composure they'd shown throughout our ordeal. They'd grieved the loss of the father they'd thought they had years earlier, This was just the end of a sad story that had been over for them emotionally long before it ended physically. We held a small memorial service, attended by Marcus's parents and a few old friends who remembered him before addiction had consumed his life. Isabella spoke about the father she'd loved as a child, before gambling had transformed him into someone unrecognizable. Diego read a poem about forgiveness and letting go of anger. I found that I felt sadness rather than relief at Marcus's death. Not sadness for the man he'd become, but sadness for the man he might have been if he'd chosen recovery over continued gambling. Sadness for the grandfather he'd never be to future grandchildren who would only know him through carefully edited stories about their family's history. But mostly I felt gratitude for the strength our family had found in surviving his betrayal. We'd proven to ourselves that we could overcome almost anything as long as we faced it together with honesty and courage. 7 years after that first terrible discovery, I stood in the backyard of our Phoenix home, watching David teach our grandson, his grandson, from his first marriage, how to swim in the pool that Marcus's gambling had once threatened to cost us. Isabella was inside, working on an investigative series about cryptocurrency fraud that would win her a regional journalism award. Diego was in our garage, tinkering with a solar panel system he was installing to make our house completely energy independent. The life we'd built after Marcus's destruction was richer and more fulfilling than the life we'd had before, precisely because we'd had to fight for it. We'd learned what really mattered and what was just illusion. We'd discovered strength we didn't know we possessed, and built relationships based on truth rather than comfortable lies. Sometimes people ask me if I regret marrying Marcus, if I wish I'd seen the warning signs earlier, if I blame myself for not preventing his gambling addiction. The answer is always the same. I regret the pain our family endured, but I don't regret the journey that led us to where we are now. Marcus's gambling addiction revealed his true character, but it also revealed ours. And what it revealed about my children and me was that we're survivors, fighters, and people who choose love and honesty, even when it's difficult. The cryptocurrency that Marcus thought would make us rich is now completely worthless. Mooncoin, and most of the other digital currencies he invested in, have disappeared entirely, their websites defunct, their creators vanished, with whatever money they managed to extract from gullible investors, like my ex-husband. But the real wealth our family discovered through surviving his betrayal, the trust and communication and resilience we built together, is worth more than any financial investment could ever be. That's the legacy I want to leave my children. Not a pile of money that could be lost to the next financial scam, but the character and wisdom to build meaningful lives regardless of what economic storms they might face. When people ask me what I learned from my husband's cryptocurrency gambling addiction, I tell them this: the most important investment you can make is in relationships based on honesty and trust. Everything else, no matter how promising it looks, can disappear overnight. But a family that's learned to communicate openly and support each other through crisis can survive almost anything. Marcus used to say, "You'll thank me later," when defending his gambling decisions. He was wrong about the cryptocurrency investments, but he was accidentally right about one thing. In the end, I did thank him. Not for the gambling that nearly destroyed us, but for the crisis that forced us to become the strong, honest, resilient family we never would have become without it. Sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the most terrible packages. Our family's greatest strength was forged in the fire of Marcus's betrayal, and for that, I'm ultimately grateful. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.